here's something as well that I think was kind of interesting. I know a couple of Raider fans, and sorry if it looks like I'm on my phone, because I am. I am scrolling back to a tweet from a couple of days ago. I know how the season ended for the Arizona Cardinals was frustrating, and I held them accountable. I went after this team, but it's a chance to have a moment of gratitude this morning when you look at a team like the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders fired Tom Telesco after just one season. Keep in mind, he drafted a starting center, he drafted a superstar tight end, and it was a fine draft. You know, I had one friend tell me, well, he failed in free agency. I'm like, okay. He went and signed Christian Wilkins, which probably the blessing of a guy like Antonio Pierce to do so. And Christian Wilkins got injured. What's the issue there? It's not Tom Telesco's fault. You know, it was a moment of gratitude to have with this team because I know how awful it ended towards the later parts of the season, but it could be worse. Your team could be the Raiders. What we've seen with the Cardinals is competency. At the bare minimum, competency, which I understand is not asking of much of your team, but the Cardinals for years never really had that. Under Jonathan Gannon, under Monty Ossenfort, they're at least very competent. You know what the Raiders keep doing year in and year out? Firing coaches. Firing GMs. The next coach the Raiders have is they're going to be paying 4 coaches at one time. Unheard of. And here's what I get by that. Or here's what I'm getting to by that. Good teams use incompetent teams as farm systems. And that's what you have to do if you're the Cardinals. The Raiders are going to be going through another rebuild. They're basically just hitting the full reset button. They're going to do a bunch of interviews. They're going to have a GM, a new GM. And they're going to have to redo everything. And that leads me to this. And I talked about this a couple of days ago. It's very well documented. Max Crosby doesn't want to continue to lose. And he loves the Raiders, but it's been incompetency. It's been foolishness. The ownership has been bad. The next test for the Arizona Cardinals as a competent organization is to take advantage of the incompetent ones. Incompetent teams still have talent. Brock Bowers is there, and Maxx Crosby as well as there. You have to be able to take advantage of those teams. It is the duty of Monty Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon to show off what they can do this offseason. Go get Max Crosby. Because you know what the Raiders are doing? Just like how I kind of talked about earlier with Kyler Murray. They're still looking for a quarterback. The Cardinals got their quarterback. You were going to use that pick on a pass rusher anyways. And you probably weren't bad enough to get a Jalen Walker from Georgia. And you probably weren't bad enough to get an Abdul Carter from Penn State. So you know what you can do? You sweet talk the Raiders, who would likely like to move up in the draft, for that being one Shedeur Sanders. A guy who's got a real affinity for some godforsaken reason with the Las Vegas Raiders. You send them your first round pick. You're not sending them 2 firsts. That's overkill. But a first, a second rounder, potentially a this year third rounder. So a first and a third this year, or a first and a second next year. That's what it could look like for this Cardinals team. That's the next step of competency for this front office, is taking advantage of the incompetent organizations. Carefully and strategically plucking out major talent like Max Crosby to this team. And if there's a chance that Max Crosby becomes available this offseason, like, just call it what it is. It would be a failure if the Cardinals didn't make that happen. This team needs pass rushing in the worst degree, in the worst way. I mean, if it wasn't manufacturing pressure artificially through blitz, through schemes, there's no talent on this defensive line. You add Max Crosby to that fold, maybe potentially throw a little bit of money at a Josh Sweat, a Hassan Reddick. With the defensive capabilities of Nick Rollis and Jonathan Gannon, this team can be ultimately very scary. But it's what kind of shows you to be a little bit thankful. Even if the Cardinals have largely been frustrating over the past couple of decades, especially over the last 10 years. Do you know if the Cardinals make the playoffs next year, it would still be a decade between their last win in the playoffs? Their last win was that Green Bay Packers win in the divisional round when the Cardinals were the 2 seed 10 years ago. First off, I cannot believe that was 10 years ago. But this team, as stated before, needs to support Kyler, needs to support Jonathan Gannon. It is a all-in or all-out season. If you don't make the playoffs next year, Jonathan Gannon's probably getting fired, because that means they likely regressed even more. Monty Ossenfort, you don't usually get a chance to survive the head coach too. He might just be gone by association. So it's not just about showing the world you're a competent team and taking advantage of the incompetent organizations. It's also about saving your job. Max Crosby looks to be available for the first time in ever, potentially. You know through back channels if the guy might be. You know what that might look like. You have to go do that. You have to go do that. Show Arizona Cardinals fans, the media, that although the end of the season was rough, you're still competent. And you can make those improvements. You can support your young quarterback in Kyler Murray. You can support your head coach in Jonathan Gannon, who I'm sure desperately would love a Max Crosby on this team.